Welcome to the NASIC 2020 session, The Power of Cross-Unit Data Sharing, Non-Traditional Uses for ILLiad, presented by Megan Lounsbury at Louisiana State University and Nicole Wood from Austin Peay State University. Please refer to SCED for a complete biography of the speakers. Please also participate in our online forum, which can be located at the NASIC website with questions or comments about this session. These links are provided below the video. NASIC's Code of Conduct applies to all discussion on the forum. Please tweet about this session using the hashtag NASIC 2020. We would like to thank the NASIC sponsors for helping us make our online conference freely available.
As stated, the title of our presentation is The Power of Cross-Unit Data Sharing, Non-Traditional Uses for ILLiad. I'm Nicole Wood. I'm the Resource Management Librarian at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. And in this position, I provide some interlibrary loan services, but I predominantly use ILLiad for collection development purposes, which is what I will be discussing today. And Megan will be beginning this presentation with her subjects as well.
Hi, as Maria and Nicole mentioned, I'm Megan Lounsbury, and I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And just to give you guys a quick overview of what our presentation will cover today, Nicole and I are going to discuss how we used ILLiad, an ILL request management software, to generate data that can be useful to library units beyond interlibrary loan. First, I'm going to talk about how I used ILLiad generated reports to identify and correct e-resource access issues and what those reports revealed in terms of common problems as well as similar tasks performed by two different units. And finally, what does all the overlap mean? Is this an opportunity? Should we begin to reimagine the traditional role of ILL processing to include some troubleshooting? And so then Nicole will discuss how she used ILLiad data to inform collection development decisions at her institution. Examples of this include how she used ILLiad web reports to identify collection gaps and provide contextual data for journal usage, how she used ILLiad to identify heavily used resources, and her implementation of a buy not borrow policy. Today, I'm going to talk a lot about interlibrary loans, so I'd like to give you all some background information so that you understand how I came to know the nuts and bolts of interlibrary loan software and procedures. I got my start in the field of librarianship as a paraprofessional staff member in LSU's ILL department back in 2007. I remained with that unit for 10 years and served as head for my final 2 years there. In 2017, I received my MLIS and was promoted to the newly created position of Electronic Resources Librarian. So now that you're up to speed on how I came to know so much about ILL, what about troubleshooting? How was that task managed prior to my position? Well, before 2017, e-resource management tasks were spread out between staff in different departments. Troubleshooting specifically was handled by both collection development and IT staff. Issues were reported only when users notified frontline staff and they subsequently submitted a ticket on behalf of the user. The nature of the issue determined who would tend to the ticket. For example, remote access and authentication issues would be seen by IT staff, and coverage and access would be overseen by collection development staff. As for ILL and its relationship to collection services, there was little interaction or communication. Every now and then, we might pass along a citation for a resource that was inaccessible, but nothing on a regular basis. So as I was getting ready to transition to my new role, I knew I'd be tasked with troubleshooting, and lots of it. Given my experience processing ILL requests, I knew ILLiad would be a great way to come up with a list of access issues that I could get started on right away. To do this, I created a flag in ILLiad called Access Issue. I then asked my ILL staff to note each time they discover an access issue in the item number field of the ILLiad request. The screenshots above highlight both our flag list and the item number field of an ILLiad request. To extract these requests, each week I run a custom search report in ILLiad using the access issue flag as my parameter. This will generate a list of all the requests that processors marked as an issue. I then export that data into a spreadsheet before getting started with my investigation. I add a column called assessment and another column called resolution. In the assessment column, I note my findings, and in the resolution column, I note what I did to fix the problem or why it was not actually an access issue. Once the report is complete, I send it to the head of ILL so that he can review it and see where his staff might need more training. So in 2019, I looked at a year's worth of data, and here's a snapshot of what I found. ILL reported a total of 1,287 access issues using the flag, but only 891 contained an actual description of the error they encountered. Of the 891 access issues described, 874 were due to a paywall and 145 were described as a faulty link. As I dug deeper into the issues, I found open access content to be a common theme, while others seemed to be a misunderstanding of the processing procedure or local policy, which I will get into in just a minute. Now, of the issues related to paywalls, you can see that the underlying issue could be attributed to incorrect or missing coverage information, no subscription to the content, and finally, open access. As for requests described as a bad link, processors encountered easy proxy errors, links that brought them to an error page of some kind, like a 404 kind of message, or they were unable to access open access content. The other category represents what I'm calling access issue flukes. These are the ones reported as a bad link, but when I investigated the citation, I had no issue accessing the full text. It's likely that these were inaccessible at the time the ILL processor tried to view them because there was a problem on the vendor side. And as I mentioned, open access came up a lot, so I wanted to understand more clearly why processors couldn't access them. After drilling down into the open access issues, I found that the biggest issue with open access content had to do with the fact that processors were confused by hybrid journals. Processors would see these journals labeled as open access, not realizing that it could contain both free and subscribed content. This led me to the realization that a discussion needed to be had with ILL staff about open access and its variability. Another issue they were unaware of is that publishers sometimes buy fully open access journals and make them subscription access only. And finally, there was open access content available, but it took a little bit of Google searching. So all in all, this data led to a discussion with ILL staff on open access, what it is, how it works, and how to find it outside of our systems. Inevitably, as I sifted through the data, I encountered requests where there wasn't exactly an access issue, but rather a processor error. This is where these reports become useful for ILL staff. They can see where they might need more training on how to process different kinds of ILL requests. For example, processors have to be on the lookout for chapters that are part of a monographic series. If while searching our resources, they are unable to locate a record for the series title, they should then check for a record for the monographic title. This can be tricky to understand for new ILL staff with little or no library experience. Other processor errors had to do with bad citations, local policies, and simple mistakes. So what were the big takeaways of this project? The first one is that ILLiad is useful beyond ILL work. Its custom search report is amazing and can provide excellent data at an extremely granular level. The second thing I realized is that this process is an easy way to identify access issues on the fly, which makes it a more proactive approach to solving access issues. Our process was entirely reactive prior to this project, so this is a huge improvement. Next, and I think this is pretty important, is that this data demonstrates how communication between departments can reveal intersections and overlaps of the work we do, which leads to improved workflows and a better trained staff overall. And finally, I couldn't help but notice how much processing ILL requests resembles troubleshooting e-resource issues. Both processes begin with a thorough search of our resources, and the complexity of troubleshooting is no worse than processing ILL requests. ILL staff could easily be trained to investigate and solve access issues in the course of processing the initial request. I know the word consolidation can make folks a little uneasy, but this is definitely an area of e-resource management that could easily be merged into traditional ILL processing duties. And finally, this presentation is based off a paper I recently wrote, which is due out this month. So if you're interested in learning about this project in more detail, here's where you can find it. So that's it for my part of the presentation. I am now going to turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Megan. I will share my screen. So I graduated with my NLIS in 2016 with a focus on academic libraries and technical services. I first used ILLiad as a library intern at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is a position that I held throughout working on my MLIS degree. And I'm currently the resource management librarian at Austin Peay State University. And in this position, I don't interact with ILLiad on a day-to-day basis, but I do provide interlibrary loan backup, and I use ILLiad heavily for collection development purposes. So the itinerary for this portion of the presentation is that we will look at using ILLiad web reports to identify and fill collection gaps and to provide additional context for journal usage statistics. We will discuss searching ILLiad to identify heavily requested resources and the implementation of a buy not borrow plan to get requests through ILLiad into the hands of faculty and staff at Austin Peay as quickly as possible. So I've included an image of the excavations at the Cave of Santa Ana because ILLiad web reports can be used to dig up evidence that can tell the story of how your collection has evolved over time through statistics that aren't readily available either through circulation reports or vendor usage data. So web reports can excavate usage statistics for resources that are not in your collection. They can add historical context for recently purchased serials. They can alert collection development and liaison librarians of potential holes in the library's collection, and they can inform end-of-year purchases if you have some collection development funds that need to be used up quickly before the fiscal year ends. So the web reports that I use to identify collection development gaps are most requested journals, most requested loans, and requests by department. Each of these reports provide slightly different information, and they need to be run and interpreted in slightly different ways. So here is an example of our most requested journals for the current fiscal year. 22 is a surprisingly high number of requests for the Journal of American College Health, especially when we consider the fact that this is not everyone who needed to access the journal. It only reflects those who were proactive enough to request a resource through interlibrary loan. This list can be used at the end of the fiscal year if you do have some of that money left over, perhaps not enough for a database, but a bit too much to spend on monographs. So we at Austin Peay could see if the Journal of American College Health has a perpetual access purchase option and acquire that if we deem that it is sufficiently used for the sake of adding it to our collection. But I did want to find a bit of additional context. So here is our most requested journals for the past 10 years, and we still see the Journal of American College Health as one of our most requested journals, but it's only been requested 23 times in the past 10 years, which means that it was requested 22 times in this fiscal year, and then 1 time in the previous 9 years. So why did this happen? Maybe we unsubscribed to something that was being used a bit more than we thought, and this journal picked up the slack. Maybe there's a new discipline within the department that we need to research. But that being said, this could just reflect the fact that someone possibly had a research subject for the short term that they needed this title for, and it's not a long-term priority. We can also use this report to expand our serial statistics for recent acquisition. At some point in the past 10 years, the library has gained access to the titles highlighted in pink. We now have vendor statistics for our current usage on these journals, but we can also use this information for additional context on how often these journals were used before they were in our permanent collection. You can also request reports on the most requested loans. I like to think of this as the print equivalent of ebook turnaway alerts. So vendors let you know when patrons try to access ebooks or e-resources in their collection and they're turned away because you don't have access. This is essentially the same thing. A patron came to the library or visited the library's website looking for a resource, and we did not have that resource in our collection. You can also use this to see if there are any subject areas that are heavily requested. Last year was the 100th anniversary of the women's earning the right to vote. And because Austin Peay is so close to Nashville, Tennessee, the Tennessee vote at the Nashville or the state capitol in Nashville was a very heavily researched subject, and we got bombarded with interlibrary loan requests for books on that topic. And I then realized that we were pretty heavily lacking on those resources in our collection, and so I used those suggestions to bulk up our women's suffrage collection. So our most heavily used resources for the current fiscal year is capped at 2 requests per resource, which might not seem like enough to warrant a purchase at your library, depending on your circulation statistics. So you can also run a most requested loans report for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Here is our report for 10 years, and I've highlighted organic chemistry because that's the title that I'm going to pursue a little bit further in the next slide. But I do also want to draw your attention to the 3rd most requested title, just to show the difference in the amount of research you might have to do to determine which book is being requested. So Fort Henry and Fort Donelson campaigns, February 1862 source book. The General Service Schools, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, 1923. I think it's safe to assume that all 7 of those requests are for the exact same book. It's pretty unlikely that 2 or more authors independently came to that title on their own. But our most heavily requested loan title, Organic Chemistry, is a very generic title. So that could all be the same book, but it most likely isn't. And our ILLiad web reports don't give us any more information than this. So we have to jump into ILLiad and do a custom request search for the transaction loan title, which is Organic Chemistry. And then I've also searched for the transaction request type of loan because I'm not interested in journals or journal articles for this search. And here I get the full citation information for every loan with the title Organic Chemistry. And you can use ILLiad's interface to look through this information. I like to export it into Excel for easier cleanup. And within Excel, if you have too much information to do a quick browse, there are a variety of ways that you can figure out and identify, which loans are actually the same resource. In this example, I've just highlighted the loan author column and run a search for duplicate fields. And so we can see that we have a few duplications. So we have one organic chemistry text that has been requested 3 times, one text that's been requested twice, one text that's been requested 4 times. And so even though we have within this information 4 requests titled Organic Chemistry by the same author, there is some evidence that this might actually be 2 different books because we have 2 different titles and 2 different publishers. Another interesting thing that I noticed within this report, I've changed the usernames of the requesters for the sake of privacy, but most of these were actually requested by the same person. So even if we determine that this is not a book, there's not a book in this spreadsheet that we want to pursue for purchase, we could reach out to that faculty member and ask why they are requesting so many resources on the same subject and if they would like us to purchase any for access. The final report is requests by college/department. This is not good for identifying specific resources to acquire, but it can reveal changes in patron information needs, and it can demonstrate positive and negative consequences of past collection development decisions. So I just ran a report for the current fiscal year and then for the past 10 years. On the whole, this makes sense with what I know of our user needs and our general patron population. Something that immediately caught my eye was the falling off of our education department in the current fiscal year. And the only reason this caused an alert to raise up is the fact that we recently added an EDD program to our education department. So it would make sense that we would see an increase in usage rather than a decrease. So I just ran a more detailed report on our education department and noticed that there was a pretty steady decline in usage over the past 10 years. So it's possible that this could be explained for a variety of different reasons. It's possible that we purchased access to a journal that they had been requesting regularly, and now patrons can access that just through our normal collection, which is actually the case. If you look at our top 15 most requested journals by the education department, we now have access to 5 of those. And we've also, in the past 10 years, gained access to a variety of new big deal vendor packages, including JSTOR, EBSCO, and ProQuest ebook collections, various journal collections. And so users might be, even if they're not finding these specific resources that they were requesting through interlibrary loan, they might be finding those, satisficing titles that are good enough for their research. It's possible that with all of these additional collections being added, we should see a total decline across all of our ILL department requests, which is true. I also ran a report for total requests received, and we see almost an identical trend line for decline in requests. And these trends, together with an increase in our access to electronic information, indicates that library patrons are using the content that we are adding to our collection. It's hard to curate these big deal vendor packages that we have been adding, but the decrease in interlibrary loan requests do indicate that our patrons are satisfied with the content. Because of the way our registration form is structured, we can't run the requests by department and user type report, but it would be interesting to see if requests by faculty declined as well, or if this is a student-led trend. And this would be interesting because faculty are hopefully a bit more discerning with the sources that they use. And so if we see interlibrary loan requests decline with them as well, it is a good indication that these e-resource packages are actually providing the content that our users want. And so with all of these reports, usually they're small enough to just clean up really quickly in an Excel spreadsheet, but if you do download, individual patron records, you might end up with a couple hundred records. Pivot tables are a great way to clean up this information, but if you don't have experience with pivot tables, QTools has an advanced combined rows utility that you can use to tally how often a phrase or a title appears in a spreadsheet of data. And you can also find various Python scripts that have already been written that can be used to clean up this Excel data. Here is an example of a script from W3 resource that I have tweaked just a little bit in the past to tally the number of times a title appeared in a spreadsheet as well. So the final topic I want to discuss is the implementation of our Buy Not Borrow program. Buy Not Borrow, the title speaks for itself. Essentially, when someone requests a resource through interlibrary loan that can be purchased or meets a certain amount of criteria, we'll purchase the title rather than borrow it. And our loose criteria is that the item is not available through our courier system. It's been published in the last 5 years. It costs less than $75 and it fits within our collection development policies. So here are some examples of resources that we have purchased in the past year as part of our Buy Not Borrow plan. And the average turnaround time for our current fiscal year for all monograph orders, the turnaround time from order to when the book is on the shelf is 24 days. All monograph interlibrary loan requests currently averages 18 days. This is a little bit skewed because of the COVID-19 situation. If we take those outliers out, most of our monographs are interlibrary loan monograph requests are filled within 10 days. But the turnaround time for Buy Not Borrow with expedited shipping and processing was 6 days. And we only have usage data for the current fiscal year, and this is a little bit limited because most of our Buy Not Borrow books were requested by faculty who can check out resources for up to 6 months. So these resources haven't circulated very much. But for everything that we have purchased in the current fiscal year, our current circulation statistics are 0.54. So half of all of our books have circulated once. Our circulations for all Buy Not Borrow purchases are 1.16, even with that extended loan period for faculty. Renewals for all fiscal year purchases is 0.13, and renewals for all fiscal year Buy Not Borrow purchases is 0.33. So these resources are circulating at a higher rate than our collection in general, and this is partially because we know when a faculty member or a student requests something through interlibrary loan that it is actually something that they want to use and not a suggestion, as might be the case with a normal request to add something to the collection. We've also added a Buy Not Borrow for distance education. So if a student lives more than 50 miles away from Austin P, they can request that ILL books be delivered to their house, but there are a few limitations that come with this, namely the fact that students are responsible for the cost of returning the book to us, and also the fact that the delivery time is included in their loan period. So we have added Buy Not Borrow for distance education to purchase one user ebook access for books that are requested by these distance students if the one user ebook access matches our Buy Not Borrow criteria, namely the $75 limit. If we can get ebook perpetual access to the resource for approximately the same amount of money that it would cost us to ship the book from the lending library and to the student and then back to the lending library, it seems like a better use of money to go ahead and get long-term access to that resource. So the takeaways from this portion of the presentation match Megan's pretty heavily. The data collected in ILLiad can be used by many departments for decision making. And we don't have to wait for patrons to request resources. We already know what they need, and we can find that out through what they are requesting through interlibrary loan. And although the data is a little bit limited, it can add color to circulation statistics and the vendor usage data that you receive annually from vendors. And so that is my portion of the presentation, and I can turn it back over to our host.
Thanks everybody for attending this NASIG 2020 session. The speakers will be monitoring the NASIG forum through June 2020. The links to the forum, SCED, and our code of conduct are below the video. Please tweet about this session using the hashtag NASIG 2020. Thank you.